I'm 89 years old, and Parkinson's disease is erasing my memories. But before I forget, the world needs to know the truth about what I found bleeding in the snow in 1977. His name was Ember, and for 47 years, I hid the most important biological discovery in human history in my barn. This is why I kept him secret, and why I'd do it all over again. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me where you're watching this story from. I'm 89 years old now, and for 47 years I've carried a secret that would rewrite everything science claims to understand about intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to be human. In a hidden grave somewhere in the North Cascades, marked only by stones that 3 people on Earth can find, lies a being that the world spent centuries hunting into extinction. His name was Ember, and he was my closest friend for nearly half a century. I tell you this from a nursing home in Bellingham, Washington, where the fluorescent lights buzz constantly, and the smell of disinfectant never quite covers the odor of age and resignation. My hands shake as I speak, not just from the Parkinson's that's stealing my memories one synapse at a time, but from the weight of keeping this truth locked inside for so long. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months before the disease progresses to the point where these memories fragment and scatter like leaves in wind. 6 months to tell a story that spans 47 years. 6 months to honor a promise I made to someone who trusted me when he had every reason to fear. Some will call me senile, others will call me a liar. But I have proof: journals, photographs locked in a safe deposit box, medical records that document injuries no known North American mammal could have sustained. More importantly, I have 2 witnesses who saw him, touched him, understood what he was. And I have the drawing he made of me in 1989, rendered in charcoal on paper with fingers that could crush bone but chose gentleness instead. This is the story of how a skeptical wildlife biologist became guardian to a species that chose extinction over revelation, and why, before Parkinson's erases the most important relationship of my life, the world needs to know that Bigfoot was real, and he deserved so much better than what we gave him. November 15th, 1977. That's the date when my life split into before and after, though I didn't know it yet as I lay in my narrow bed in that isolated cabin, listening to the November wind rattle the shutters. I was 42 years old then, a widower living alone in the North Cascades of Washington State, 20 miles from the nearest town of Concrete. The property was 15 acres of old-growth forest, Douglas firs that had stood for 3 centuries, western hemlocks that created cathedral-like spaces where light filtered down in dusty shafts. A single dirt road connected me to civilization, and that road became impassable for weeks at a time during heavy snow. My name is Marcus Holloway. Back then, I worked as a wildlife biologist and forest ranger for the National Park Service, conducting population surveys of endangered species, monitoring habitat health, filing reports that mostly gathered dust in bureaucratic offices. I'd moved to that cabin 3 years earlier after Rachel died. My wife of 18 years, gone in an instant when a drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 20. After the funeral, I couldn't stand our house in Seattle anymore. Every room held her ghost. The kitchen where she'd hum while cooking, the reading chair where she'd curl up with mystery novels, the garden she'd tended with such patience. So I took a remote posting and bought that cabin for $18,000, everything I had after selling the Seattle house. It was primitive: 1 bedroom, a main room with a wood stove, a kitchen with a hand pump for water, an outhouse 50 feet from the back door. No electricity beyond what a small generator could provide for a few hours daily. The only phone was a landline that failed whenever snow accumulated on the lines, which was most of winter. My nearest neighbor was Tom Henderson, 8 miles west. We'd have coffee together maybe once every 2 months, and that was all the human contact I wanted. I preferred the company of the black bears I catalogued, the mountain goats I counted from ridge lines, the spotted owls whose calls echoed through the darkness. That November night, Jimmy Carter was president. Hotel California played on the AM radio that barely worked. The most advanced technology I owned was a Nikon F2 camera for documenting wildlife. The world felt simpler then, or maybe I was just naive about how quickly everything would change. I woke at 3:17 a.m. I remember checking my wind-up watch, to a silence that made my skin prickle. Anyone who spent time in deep wilderness knows that forests are never truly silent. There's always something. Wind in branches, an owl hunting, small mammals rustling through undergrowth, the distant rush of a creek. But that night, nothing. An oppressive, unnatural quiet that pressed against the cabin walls like a physical presence. Then I heard it. Not the sound that had awakened me, that was something my unconscious mind had processed and filed as wrong, but the sound that made me grab my flashlight and rifle with hands that weren't quite steady. Something large was moving through the forest maybe 200 yards from the cabin. Not the purposeful four-legged gait of a bear or elk. Something heavier, more deliberate. And underneath that sound, barely audible, a vocalization I'd never heard in 20 years of fieldwork. Low, guttural, almost subsonic, a groan of pain that resonated in my chest cavity. I pulled on my boots, threw my parka over my thermal underwear, and stepped into the moonlit clearing. The full moon turned the fresh snow blue-white, bright enough to cast shadows. The temperature had dropped to maybe 15 degrees. My breath formed clouds that hung in the still air. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the direction of the creek. I followed it, rifle ready but safety on, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness between tree trunks. And that's when I saw the blood. Not just a few drops. A trail of dark liquid, almost black in the moonlight, staining the pristine snow in irregular spatters and drag marks. Too much blood for something to survive losing. Whatever I was tracking was dying. The tracks made me stop cold. I knelt down, my flashlight beam focused on the clearest print. Footprints, but impossible ones. Roughly humanoid in shape, a heel, 5 toes, a broad flat sole, but massive. I pulled out my measuring tape with shaking hands, 18 inches long. 7 inches across at the widest point. The impressions were deep, suggesting something weighing at least 600 pounds based on the snow density. My scientific brain tried to rationalize. A bear walking on hind legs. A hoax. Someone in costume bleeding theatrical blood. Anything but what the evidence clearly suggested. I followed the trail for another 100 yards, the blood increasing in volume, the drag marks becoming more pronounced. Whatever this was, it was weakening rapidly. And then I came to a small clearing near the frozen creek and I saw it. At first, my eyes couldn't process what they were seeing. Too large, wrong proportions, covered in hair that caught the moonlight like dark copper. It was lying on its side near a downed cedar tree. One arm stretched out toward the creek as if reaching for water it no longer had strength to obtain. I moved closer, decades of field training warring with every primal instinct screaming at me to run. 50 feet away, 40, 30, close enough now to see details that made my scientific worldview crack like thin ice. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall even lying down, maybe more. The shoulders were impossibly broad, probably 4 feet across, with musculature that suggested phenomenal strength. The entire body was covered in reddish-brown hair, longer around the shoulders and head, shorter on the arms and torso. But it was the face that made my breath catch. Not quite ape, not quite human. Something profoundly in between. A prominent brow ridge like I'd seen in reconstructions of Homo erectus, but more pronounced. A broad, flat nose with large nostrils. A heavy jaw that protruded slightly. Dark lips pulled back in a grimace of pain. And the eyes. God, those eyes. Even half-closed with pain and exhaustion, they held an intelligence that was unmistakable. Deep brown with flecks of amber, set under heavy lids, tracking my movement with awareness that went far beyond animal cognition. The creature made that sound again, that low, subsonic groan, and tried to move away from me. That's when I saw the wounds. 3 gunshot injuries, 2 in the right shoulder, clustered close together, probably from the same shooter. 1 lower, just above the hip, alarmingly close to where vital organs would be. The blood loss was catastrophic. dark red, almost burgundy, pooling in the snow beneath it. The shoulder wounds had torn through muscle and possibly shattered bone. The abdominal wound was still seeping steadily. My mind raced through possibilities. If I called this in, reported an unknown species shot and dying on federal land, what would happen? Scientists would swarm. The creature would be sedated, transported, studied. If it survived, it would spend the rest of its life in captivity, poked and prodded, photographed, its existence proven to a world that would see it as specimen, not person. If it died here, its body would be dissected, catalogued, preserved in formaldehyde. Either way, its life as a free being was over. But as I stood there, rifle heavy in my hands, flashlight beam illuminating those intelligent, terrified eyes, I made a different calculation, one that would define the next 47 years of my life. This wasn't a discovery. This was a person. Different from me, certainly, but thinking, feeling, aware. And this person had been shot, probably by hunters who'd seen something they didn't understand and reacted with violence. This person was dying alone in the snow, miles from whatever family or community it might have, suffering because my species couldn't accept anything that didn't fit our narrow definition of humanity. I lowered my rifle slowly, making sure the movement was visible. The creature's eyes tracked the weapon, then returned to my face. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice sounding strange in the profound silence. "I'm going to help, if you'll let me." I don't know if it understood the words, but it must have read something in my tone or body language, because when I took a step closer, it didn't try to move away. It just watched me with those impossibly human eyes, breathing shallow and rapid, each exhale forming small clouds in the frigid air. I ran back to the cabin, my lungs burning, and grabbed everything I thought I might need. My veterinary first aid kit. I was licensed to treat wildlife in emergency situations. Clean towels, bottles of hydrogen peroxide and iodine, gauze and medical tape, a bottle of Jack Daniels, the only anesthetic I had, my Coleman lantern for better light, and because some instinct told me I'd need it, a sleeping bag and a large plastic tarp. The creature was still there when I returned, which somehow surprised me. It could have dragged itself away, hidden deeper in the forest to die alone. But it had stayed, waited, trusted, or was simply too weak to move. I set the lantern on a fallen log, creating a pool of harsh white light that turned the blood shockingly bright. Then I knelt in the bloody snow about 6 feet away, close enough to work but maintaining respectful distance. "This is going to hurt," I said, unscrewing the Jack Daniels. "I'm sorry, but if we don't clean these wounds, infection will kill you even if the bullets don't." I poured whiskey over my hands, sterilizing them as best I could. Then I looked at the creature, really looked, making eye contact, waiting. It made a soft sound, different from the pain groan. Lower, almost questioning. Then, impossibly, it shifted its position slightly, moving the injured shoulder toward me, presenting the wounds. Giving permission, I worked for the next 3 hours as dawn gradually lightened the sky. The shoulder wounds were through and through. Bullets had passed completely through muscle tissue, missing the bone by maybe half an inch. I cleaned them with peroxide that foamed pink with blood, packed them with gauze, wrapped them as tightly as I dared. The creature made sounds of pain, low vocalizations that vibrated through my chest, but it never pulled away, never tried to stop me. The abdominal wound was worse. The bullet was still lodged inside. I could feel the hard edge of it through swollen tissue. Removing it was beyond my capability without proper surgical tools, without anesthetic, without any training in treating gunshot wounds in a species I didn't even have a name for. "I can't take it out," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I don't know how without making it worse." The creature looked at me with those eyes, and I swear it understood. It made that soft sound again, reached out with one massive hand, fingers as thick as bratwurst, nails dark and strong, and touched my arm. Just barely, just enough to feel the warmth through my parka sleeve. "Thank you," that touch said. You tried. I cleaned the wound as best I could, packed it with antibiotic ointment I hoped wouldn't be toxic to alien physiology, and wrapped it in layers of gauze. Then I opened the sleeping bag and carefully draped it over the creature's body. It pulled the fabric close with visible relief, shivering despite the thick fur. "You need shelter," I said, looking at the sky. The moon was setting, dawn turning the horizon gold pink. "You can't stay here. In a few hours, the sun will be up, and if anyone's tracking you—" I didn't finish that thought. The creature tried to stand, got about halfway up before collapsing back into the snow with a sound that was unmistakably a grunt of frustration. The blood loss had been too severe. The injuries too extensive. "My cabin," I said, making a decision that terrified me even as I spoke the words. "It's not far, maybe 200 yards. Can you walk if I help support you?" It took us 90 minutes to cover that distance. The creature, I estimated it weighed close to 700 pounds, leaned heavily on me, one massive arm across my shoulders, the other clutching its wounded side. Every few steps we had to stop while it caught its breath, swayed with dizziness, gathered strength to continue. The sun was fully up by the time we reached the cabin, cold and bright in a cloudless sky. I couldn't take it inside the cabin itself, too risky, too visible through the windows, but I had a barn built decades ago by some previous owner, maybe 80 feet from the main structure. Solid construction with a loft for hay storage and a main floor that hadn't housed animals in years. I'd been using it for equipment storage, old furniture, things I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I cleared the largest space I could, piling things haphazardly against walls. The creature watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, breathing labored. When I'd made a space maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, I spread the tarp on the dirt floor, then layered it with every blanket and sleeping bag I owned. "Here," I said, gesturing. "It's not much, but it's dry and hidden." The creature moved slowly into the barn, each step obviously painful, and lowered itself onto the makeshift bed with a sigh that was purely human in its expression of relief. It lay on its uninjured side, pulled a blanket over itself, and looked at me with eyes that held a question. "I'll bring water," I said, "and food. You need to stay here, stay hidden. Nobody can know about you, do you understand?" The creature regarded me for a long moment. Then, deliberately, it nodded. One clear, unmistakable nod of understanding. I sat down hard on an old crate, my legs suddenly weak. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "You really do understand." Another nod. Slower this time, eyes never leaving mine. "Okay," I said, running shaking hands through my hair. "Okay, we can work with this." The first week was a blur of terror and wonder in equal measure. I called in sick to work, first time in my career, claiming severe flu. I boiled water on the wood stove, carried it to the barn in thermoses. I didn't know what a creature like this would eat, so I tried everything. Dried venison from my stores, apples from the root cellar, canned beans, raw eggs. The creature refused the beans and eggs, accepted the venison and apples eagerly. I made a note in the journal I'd started keeping. Carnivorous or omnivorous, preference for raw meat and fruit. The fever came on day 3. I woke to find the creature's forehead burning to touch. I estimated 104 degrees or higher. The abdominal wound was inflamed, seeping pus that smelled sweet and wrong. Infection, despite all my precautions. I didn't have the right antibiotics. Nothing in my veterinary kit was designed for something this large, this unique. I made a desperate decision and drove the 20 miles to Concrete, to the veterinary clinic where Dr. E. Patricia Reeves worked with large animals, horses, cattle, the occasional elk that rangers brought in. "Pat, I need a favor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found an injured black bear on my property, pretty badly hurt. I'm treating it myself, but I think it's developing sepsis. I need antibiotics." Pat looked skeptical. "Marcus, you know the protocol. Injured wildlife, especially bears, should be reported to Fish and Wildlife. They have specialized facilities." "It's on my private property," I interrupted. "And honestly, I think if I try to move it, the stress will kill it. Just give me enough to fight the infection. If it gets worse, I'll call it in, I promise. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. You always were too much of a softie for your own good. She went to the locked cabinet and measured out dosages. Penicillin and tetracycline. This should cover most bacterial infections. You'll need to inject intramuscularly. You remember how? I remember. Back at the cabin, I administered the first dose with shaking hands. The creature flinched at the needle, and who could blame it, but held still, trusting me not to cause unnecessary harm. By the next morning, the fever had broken slightly. By day 5, it was eating again. By day 7, it was sitting up, moving carefully, testing the limits of healing tissue. During those days, we began to communicate. Not with words. I quickly realized the creature's vocal anatomy couldn't produce human speech, though it made a complex variety of sounds that clearly carried meaning. But we developed a system. 1 tap on the floor for yes, 2 taps for no. I'd point at the water bucket. Are you thirsty? 1 tap, yes, I'd hold up food. Do you want more? 1 tap or 2, depending. By week 2, the system expanded. The creature learned to point at things it needed, to gesture at its wounds when something hurt, to touch its stomach when hungry, its mouth when thirsty. I brought it a pencil and paper one evening, curious. The creature examined the pencil with intense focus, turning it in those massive fingers. Then, awkwardly at first, but with increasing confidence, it made marks on the paper. Not random. Deliberate lines that formed a crude map. Mountains, trees, a simple X marking a location. Is this where you're from? I asked, pointing at the X. 1 tap. Yes. Do you want to go back? The creature hesitated, then drew more. Stick figures, several of them, near the X. Then it drew those same figures scattered across the paper, separated by large spaces. Finally, it drew lines through some of the figures, crossing them out. My throat went tight. Your family. They're gone. The creature made a sound I hadn't heard before. Low, keening, mournful. And I understood that grief transcends species, that loss is universal in its ache. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so goddamn sorry. The creature touched my face then, gently, carefully, with 1 finger, and I realized I was crying. By December 1977, a routine had established itself. The creature, I started calling it him in my mind, though I had no real basis for assuming gender beyond general build, was healing remarkably well. The shoulder wounds had closed, leaving thick scar tissue visible beneath the reddish-brown fur. The abdominal wound was trickier. The bullet was still inside, would always be inside. A permanent foreign object his body had walled off with scar tissue. It seemed to cause chronic discomfort, but not acute danger. Ronald Reagan was governor of California, talking about running for president. Star Wars had premiered that summer, and everyone was suddenly talking about science fiction. The world felt on the cusp of something new, though I had no idea what. And in my barn, hidden from that world, I was experiencing my own private first contact. The communication system grew more sophisticated. I made flashcards with simple drawings: apple, water, fire, danger, door. The creature, I still needed to name him, learned to arrange these cards in sequences to express more complex ideas. Card showing sun, then card showing food, then card showing yes, meant, when it's daytime, I want to eat. He learned to understand time by the position of shadows, to recognize when I'd return from my shifts at the ranger station. He learned that the sound of my truck engine meant safety, that 2 quick knocks on the barn door meant me, not danger. I bought a cheap battery-powered radio at the general store and brought it to the barn. His reaction was pure wonder. He'd never heard recorded music before. Of course he hadn't. Started with classical Vivaldi's 4 Seasons because I figured it couldn't hurt. The way he sat, absolutely motionless, head tilted, listening with complete absorption, brought tears to my eyes. You like it? I asked. 1 tap. Emphatic. I brought more. Beethoven, Mozart. And one day on a whim I brought Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, which had just come out. He seemed confused by rock music but fascinated. He'd tap his finger, so gently, with such conscious control of that massive strength, in time with the beat. By January 1978, he could move freely, with only slight stiffness from the healed wounds. He could have left. The barn door wasn't locked. He knew the layout of my property, had watched through cracks in the barn walls as I came and went. But he stayed. One evening, I asked him directly, "Do you want to leave? Go back to the mountains?" He picked up the cards, arranged them carefully. Danger, fire, his symbol for humans because of guns. Death. Then he picked up the cards that showed the two figures I'd drawn to represent us. He placed them side by side, safe, together. "You're staying because it's safer here than out there," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Because whatever's out there, hunters maybe, or just the general risk of human contact, you don't want to face it alone." One tap. "Yes." "Okay," I said, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a physical thing. "Okay, then we need to make this work long-term. I'll need to insulate the barn better, install a wood stove for winter, make sure nobody has any reason to come poking around." He made that soft rumbling sound I'd learned meant approval, gratitude. Then he did something new. He placed one massive hand over his chest, then gestured at me. "Thank you." That gesture meant, "Thank you for not turning me into a specimen, for seeing me as a person, not a discovery." I spent the rest of that winter making the barn habitable. I told Tom Henderson I was converting it into a workshop, needed the privacy to work on furniture building projects. He seemed satisfied with that explanation. I insulated the walls, installed a small wood stove with a chimney that wouldn't look out of place. I built a better bed frame, brought proper mattresses from a thrift store in Bellingham during a supply run, and I finally gave him a name. "Ember," I said one evening, watching the firelight reflect in his reddish fur. "Because of your coloring, and because when I found you, you were nearly burned out. Is that okay?" He considered this, then made a new gesture, touching his own chest with one finger, pressing gently over where his heart would be. "Yes, I am Ember." The years between 1978 and 1995 passed in a rhythm that became my entire world. I worked my ranger shifts, came home to Ember, and together we built a life that existed in the margins of normal human society. Ember learned to help with simple tasks. He'd gather kindling from the forest floor, moving only at night, when risk of being seen was minimal. He developed an encyclopedic knowledge of the property, could navigate in complete darkness. He learned to recognize my emotional states, would sit quietly nearby when I was sad, make that rumbling approval sound when I was content. I learned his communication in return. The different tones of his vocalizations. There were at least 20 distinct sounds he made, each with specific meaning. The way his posture changed to indicate comfort, fear, curiosity, or pain. The hundreds of small gestures that formed our private language. We had close calls. God, so many close calls. In August 1982, a state wildlife survey helicopter flew low over the property, using infrared to count large mammal populations. I'd gotten warning from my office. This was an advantage of working for the Park Service. I heard about aerial surveys in advance, and kept Ember hidden in a root cellar I'd dug beneath the barn floor. He spent 8 hours in that cramped, dark space, perfectly silent, while the helicopter made multiple passes. Afterward, when I finally gave the all clear, he emerged with eyes that held barely controlled terror. He'd thought, I realized, that I'd betrayed him, that the sound of helicopters meant capture. It took days to rebuild that trust. In 1985, developers bought land 6 miles west. Suddenly there were construction crews, new houses, people hiking on formerly empty trails. I had to restrict Ember's movements even more severely. No more nighttime walks beyond immediate property boundaries. The risk was too high. Ember aged visibly during these restrictions. The silver in his fur, first appearing around his muzzle and eyebrows in the mid-80s, spread across his chest and shoulders. His movements, while still powerful, became more measured, careful. We were both getting older, both facing limitations we'd never had to confront before. He developed preferences that were distinctly individual. He loved honey. I kept 2 hives at the far edge of the property, ostensibly for myself, actually mostly for him. He was terrified of thunderstorms, would curl up small as something his size could manage and make distressed sounds until the storm passed. He was fascinated by mechanical objects, would study my tools for hours, seemed to understand intuitively how gears and levers worked. One night in 1989, I brought him charcoal and better paper. "Can you draw?" I asked. He made a gesture I'd come to recognize as maybe or I'll try. Then he took the charcoal and began to work. What emerged was unmistakably a portrait of me. Rough, primitive, but capturing something essential about my face, the way I held my shoulders, even somehow my expression. He'd been observing me for 12 years, cataloging details I didn't know anyone noticed. "That's incredible," I said, voice thick. Can I keep this?" One tap. Yes. I framed it, hung it in my bedroom. That drawing is in a safe deposit box now, along with the journals, the medical records, the few blurry photographs I took over the years when I finally convinced myself documentation mattered more than paranoia. But it wasn't all peaceful routine. The threats kept coming. In 1990, the first trail cameras appeared in the region. Cheap, motion-activated wildlife cameras that hunters and researchers were starting to use. I had to expand my property search pattern, hiking further each week to check for cameras that might catch Ember's nighttime movements. I found 3 over the years, disabled them with stories about wanting privacy on my own land. In 1995, something happened that forced me to expand our circle of trust or lose Ember entirely. March 1995. Ember was 18 years old. I'd been tracking his age based on dental development and other markers. He'd developed a toothache that wouldn't resolve, kept worsening despite warm compresses and my amateur attempts at treatment. One night I found him curled up, making sounds of pure distress, one massive hand pressed to his jaw. When I tried to examine the tooth, a large molar lower left, I could see swelling, smell infection. "I need to pull it," I said, knowing even as I spoke that I couldn't. "Or you need antibiotics stronger than anything I can get." Ember made a sound that I understood. "What do we do?" I paced the barn for an hour, weighing options that all seemed impossible. Then I thought of Sarah. My niece, Sarah Holloway, was 28 years old, a veterinary surgeon specializing in emergency and critical care. She worked at a large animal clinic in Seattle, dealt with horses, cattle, even the occasional exotic zoo animal. More importantly, she'd always been curious about my isolated lifestyle, never quite believed my vague explanations about needing space to process Rachel's death. The next time she called, she phoned every month like clockwork, dutiful in a way that made me love her even as I resented the intrusion. I made a decision. "Sarah, I need your help with something. Can you come up to the cabin next weekend?" "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound stressed." "I'm fine. There's something I need to show you. Something I need your help with, but you have to promise me you'll listen before you react. And that you won't tell anyone what you see. Not your parents, not your friends, not authorities. No one." There was a long pause. "Uncle Marcus, you're kind of freaking me out." "I know, just promise me. Family promise." "Okay, family promise. I'll be there Saturday morning." The week leading up to her visit, I prepared Ember as best I could. "Someone's coming," I said, arranging the cards. "Someone I trust. She's going to help with your tooth, but she's going to be shocked when she sees you. You need to stay calm, not threaten. Let her process." Ember made a questioning sound. "Family," I said, pointing to the card we'd made that showed 2 figures close together. "She's family to me. I'm trusting her the way I trust you." One tap. Understanding. Sarah arrived Saturday at 11 a.m., parking her Toyota in front of the cabin. I watched her get out, stretch, look around at the property with obvious curiosity. She was tall, practical, wearing jeans and a fleece jacket. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked competent, grounded, exactly the person I needed. "Hey, Uncle Marcus," she called, waving. "Come on inside," I said. "Coffee's on." We made small talk for 20 minutes. I was stalling, trying to find words that didn't exist. Finally, Sarah set down her mug and looked at me directly. "Okay, what's going on? You didn't ask me up here for coffee and catching up." "No," I admitted. "I asked you up here because I need a veterinary surgeon I trust absolutely, and because I'm about to show you something that will change how you understand the world." That's ominous. "Sarah, I need you to trust that I'm not crazy. I'm not delusional, and I haven't been living alone and for so long that I've lost my grip on reality. What I'm about to show you is real. It's been real for 18 years, and I need your help to keep it safe." Her expression shifted from curious to concerned. "Uncle Marcus, just come with me," I said, standing. "To the barn." We walked across the clearing in silence. At the barn door, I paused. "Remember your promise, listen before you react." I knocked twice, our signal, then opened the door. Ember was sitting on his bed, as we'd planned. Not standing. His full height would be too overwhelming. Just sitting, calm, hands visible, posture non-threatening. Sarah froze in the doorway. I watched her face cycle through expressions: confusion, disbelief, denial, terror, and finally, as Ember made a soft greeting sound, shocked acceptance. That's not—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "His name is Ember," I said quietly. "I found him dying from gunshot wounds in November 1977. I've been caring for him ever since. He's intelligent, Sarah. He understands English. He communicates through gestures and cards. And right now he has a severe tooth infection that I can't treat on my own." Sarah took a step back, then another. "This is impossible." "You're looking at him," I said. "He's right there. He's real. Bigfoot isn't. Science has proven there's no evidence." "There is now," I said gently. "You're looking at the evidence." Ember, bless him, stayed perfectly still. He'd understood that this was a critical moment, that Sarah's reaction would determine whether he received help or whether everything collapsed. Sarah stared for what felt like an eternity. Then, moving like someone in a dream, she took a careful step forward. Then another. "He's not going to hurt you," I said. "He's in pain and he's scared. But he trusts me, and I'm asking him to trust you." Sarah approached to within 10 feet. Ember watched her with those impossibly human eyes, waiting. Can he understand me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said. "Ember, this is Sarah, my family. Can you show her you understand?" Ember raised one hand, slowly, carefully, and tapped the floor once. Sarah made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Oh my God. Uncle Marcus, do you understand what this means? This is the most important biological discovery in history." "I know what it is," I said firmly, "and I know what would happen if anyone found out. He'd be captured, studied, probably killed in the process or die in captivity. That's why we need to keep this secret. That's why I'm trusting you." Sarah looked from me to Ember and back again. I could see her mind working, processing, reorganizing everything she'd believed about the world. "His tooth," she said finally. "You said he has an infection. Lower left molar. It's been getting worse for 2 weeks. Can I examine him?" I looked at Ember. "Will you let her look at your mouth?" He hesitated, then nodded. One slow, deliberate nod. Sarah spent the next hour doing what she did best, being a veterinarian. She examined Ember's jaw carefully, gently, talking to him in the soft voice she'd use with a frightened horse. She looked at his teeth, felt the swelling, took his temperature with a large animal thermometer. "Severe abscess," she said finally. "The tooth needs to come out, and he needs systemic antibiotics." "I can do it, but we'll need to sedate him. Do you have any idea what dosage would work for something his size?" "No idea," I admitted. "Okay, we'll start conservative and adjust if needed. I need to go back to Seattle, get supplies. I'll tell my supervisor I'm doing a weekend emergency farm call. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Sarah, I said. Thank you. And please, I won't tell anyone, she said. Family promise, remember? She looked at Ember. I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise. Ember made that soft rumbling sound of gratitude, and I saw tears well up in Sarah's eyes. The procedure the next day went smoothly. Sarah sedated Ember with ketamine, a huge dose but carefully calculated, and extracted the infected tooth with her portable dental tools. She left antibiotics and pain medication with detailed instructions. Before she left, she sat with Ember for a long time, just watching him sleep off the sedation. I'm going to think about this every day for the rest of my life, she said, knowing he exists, knowing he's here, knowing the world has no idea. It's a heavy burden, I said. I'm sorry to put it on you. Don't be. This is, Uncle Marcus, this is a privilege. Taking care of him, protecting him, that's sacred work. Sarah became our connection to advanced medical care, bringing supplies whenever Ember needed them, covering for purchases that might raise questions. In 2001, she married Michael Chen, a software engineer she'd met through friends. 6 months into their marriage, Michael showed up at the cabin unannounced, finding Sarah in the barn with Ember. The secret expanded to 3 people. Michael, after the initial shock wore off, became our technology expert, helping me install better security systems, teaching me how to monitor online forums where Bigfoot enthusiasts shared theories and sightings. We had to stay ahead of them, had to know if anyone was getting too close to the truth. But even with help, the threats kept escalating. By the mid-2000s, the internet was everywhere. Satellite imagery on Google Earth showed my property in concerning detail. I had to install better camouflage for the barn, plant fast-growing trees strategically. Ember aged alongside me. By 2010, we were both in our 70s, or at least I was, and I estimated Ember was similar. The silver in his fur had spread completely. His movements were stiffer, more careful. The old injuries from 1977 bothered him on cold days. Arthritis, probably, though I had no way to confirm. We spent more time sitting together, less time on the elaborate communication exercises that had dominated our earlier years. Sometimes entire evenings would pass in comfortable silence, both of us staring at the fire, both aware that time was running out. One night in 2015, I found Ember looking through old photographs I'd brought to the barn, pictures of Rachel, of my life before he existed in it. He touched her image gently, then looked at me with eyes that held a question. That was my wife, I said. Rachel, she died before I met you. Ember arranged cards, sad, loss, together. Yes, I said, throat tight. We were together, and then I was alone. Until you. He made a sound I rarely heard, the keening, mournful vocalization that meant grief. Then he placed one massive hand on my shoulder and left it there while I cried for the first time in years, grieving not just Rachel but everything. The isolation, the fear, the weight of keeping Ember hidden while the world grew smaller and more connected around us. October 2023, 46 years after our first meeting. I was 88 years old, Ember probably 68 or 70 based on aging markers. We'd both slowed considerably. I'd retired from the Park Service years earlier. My days consisted of caring for Ember, reading, listening to music together. Then Ember collapsed during the night. I found him in the morning, struggling to breathe, burning with fever, his chest crackling with every labored breath. Pneumonia. Severe. Sarah came immediately, bringing Michael and a portable oxygen concentrator. We set up an IV line. She'd done this before during other health crises, and started aggressive antibiotic therapy. For 72 hours, Ember hovered at the edge. His breathing rattled. His fever spiked to dangerous levels. There were moments when I was certain he was dying, that after 46 years I was about to lose the most important relationship of my life. I didn't leave his side. I held his hand, that massive hand that could crush bone but had only ever touched me with gentleness, and talked to him constantly. Don't leave me, I whispered at one point, exhausted and terrified. Please don't leave me alone now. His fingers tightened around mine. Weak, barely perceptible, but intentional. Still here, that squeeze said. Not leaving yet. He survived. The fever broke on day 3. By day 5, he was sitting up, eating a little. By day 7, he was recovering, though obviously weakened. But we both knew what the crisis had revealed. We were old. Our time was finite, and neither of us knew how much we had left. The following months passed quietly. Ember's recovery was slow, incomplete. He moved even more carefully now, tired easily, slept more. I wasn't doing much better. The Parkinson's diagnosis came in February 2024, explaining the tremors in my hands I'd been trying to ignore. We spent those months largely in reflection. I'd bring old journals, read entries from decades past. Ember would make sounds of recognition, touch the pages where I'd sketched him or described moments we'd shared. We looked through photographs, the few I'd risked taking over the years. Ember young and powerful, standing in dappled forest light. Ember middle-aged, silver just starting to appear in his fur. Ember elderly, dignified, eyes still sharp with intelligence. "We did okay, didn't we?" I said one evening. "Keeping you safe all these years." One tap. "Yes." "Do you regret it, staying here instead of going back to the mountains?" Ember considered this for a long time. Then he arranged cards with careful deliberation. "Safe, together, home." "This became your home," I said, understanding. He touched his chest, then mine. Then he made the gesture we'd developed decades ago, hand over heart, then extended outward. Family, love. By July 2024, Ember was declining noticeably. He ate less, slept more, moved with obvious pain that medications couldn't fully address. Sarah examined him and gave me the look I'd been dreading. "His heart is failing," she said quietly. I can hear the murmur. "And his kidneys? Marcus, I don't think he has much time." I'd known, of course I'd known, but hearing it stated made it real in a way that observation hadn't. August 12th, 2024, 47 years, almost to the day, since that November night when I found him dying in the snow. I woke that morning knowing something was different, a heaviness in the air, a quality of light that felt final. I went to the barn. I'd been sleeping on a cot there for the past month, not wanting Ember to be alone, and found him awake, sitting up, looking out the small window at the dawn light. He turned when I entered, and I saw it in his eyes. Today was the day. "Hey," I said, voice cracking. "How are you feeling?" He gestured at the cards, but his movements were slow, effortful, tired. "Pain." "I know," I said, sitting beside him. "I'm so sorry." We sat together as the sun rose, neither of us speaking. Sarah arrived around 8. I'd called her the night before, told her she should come if she wanted to say goodbye. Michael came with her. Ember acknowledged them with small gestures, saving his energy. Around noon, he made an unusual request, pointing outside to the forest. "You want to go outside?" I asked. "See the trees one more time?" One tap. Yes. It took all 3 of us to help him outside. He was weak, his legs barely supporting his weight even with our help. But we got him to the clearing behind the barn, to a spot where sunlight filtered through the Douglas firs in golden shafts. Ember sat heavily on the ground, leaning against a tree trunk. He looked around slowly, taking in the forest, the green, the light, the smell of pine and earth. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Then he reached out one hand to me. I took it, holding that massive palm in both of my hands. Sarah and Michael stood nearby, silent witnesses. "Thank you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me know you, for 47 years of friendship. Thank you for teaching me that intelligence and compassion and dignity aren't defined by species. Thank you for everything." Ember squeezed my hand gently. Then with obvious effort, he made a sound I'd never heard before, a vocalization that was almost a word. Friend. Friend. He was trying to say friend. "Yes," I sobbed. "Yes, friend. Always friend." He touched my face with his other hand, tracing my features the way I'd seen him do to that portrait he'd drawn decades ago. Memorizing, saying goodbye, Then his breathing changed, slowed, deepened, began to space out. His eyes stayed on mine, calm, accepting. "It's okay," I whispered. "You can rest now. You don't have to fight anymore." His hand in mine relaxed. His breathing grew quieter. And then, as gently as morning light spreading across the forest floor, it stopped. Ember was gone. We buried him in a location I'll never reveal, in the deep forest where no human trail goes. Sarah said words. Michael helped me lower him into the ground wrapped in blankets. We marked the spot with stones arranged in a pattern only we would recognize. I kept 3 things: a tuft of his fur carefully preserved, the portrait he'd drawn of me, and the journals, 12 volumes documenting 47 years of daily observations, breakthroughs in communication, medical treatments, and moments of profound connection between species. I sold the property 2 months later. I couldn't bear to be there without him. Couldn't stand the empty barn, the silence where his presence used to be. I moved to Bellingham, to an assisted living facility where nobody asks too many questions about the old widower who keeps to himself. The Parkinson's diagnosis was progressive. I had maybe a year, the neurologist said, before memories started to seriously fragment. Less than that, probably, before I could no longer reliably distinguish past from present. That's why I'm telling this story now, before the disease takes him away from me again, this time permanently. I'm 89 years old. I protected a Bigfoot for 47 years. I watched him age, watched him develop preferences and personality, watched him communicate complex ideas and emotions through gestures and sounds. I saw him grieve for his lost family. I saw him create art. I saw him learn to trust again despite every reason to fear my species. And I would do it all again without hesitation. Because Ember wasn't a discovery to be exploited. He was a person. Different from me, yes, but deserving of dignity, safety, respect. He was my friend, my family, the relationship that defined the second half of my life. What did those 47 years teach me? That intelligence comes in forms we haven't imagined. That consciousness doesn't require human DNA. That family isn't biology. It's choice, commitment, the willingness to put another's well-being before your own convenience. Our civilization worships discovery, but we destroy what we discover. We can't encounter something extraordinary without trying to capture it, study it, own it, profit from it. Ember understood this instinctively. That's why his kind chose extinction over revelation. Better to vanish into legend than live in laboratories. If there are others still out there, and God, I hope there are, they're watching us, learning from our behavior, drawing conclusions about whether we've evolved enough to deserve contact. Based on what I know of human history, we haven't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But maybe this story changes something. Maybe someone reads this and understands that the extraordinary doesn't exist to serve our curiosity, that some beings deserve to remain unknown, unmeasured, free. Sarah has the journals, the photographs, the medical records. When I'm gone, she'll decide what to do with them, but the location of Ember's grave will die with the 3 of us. That much, at least, stays sacred. I sit here in my nursing home room, hands shaking from Parkinson's, looking at the portrait Ember drew 45 years ago. Sometimes I swear I can still feel the weight of his hand on my shoulder, still hear that rumbling sound of contentment, still smell the wood smoke and cedar that permeated the barn where we spent thousands of evenings together. The biggest mystery isn't whether Bigfoot exists. It's whether we humans have the wisdom to leave them alone if they do. Whether we can resist the urge to catalog, capture, and control. Whether we can value a life for its own sake, not for what it proves or provides. Ember taught me that answer. Not through words, he never needed words, but through 47 years of patient, gentle existence. Through choosing connection over safety, trust over isolation, friendship across a gap that should have been unbridgeable. I was there when he took his first breath in my care, cleaning blood from wounds that should have killed him. And I was there for his last breath, holding his hand under Douglas firs that had stood for centuries before either of us was born. That's not a tragedy, that's a privilege. And if you take anything from this story, take this. The world is stranger and more wonderful than we know. There are still mysteries in the deep places. There is still magic we haven't cataloged. Don't go looking for it with cameras and tranquilizer guns. Don't try to drag it into the light and pin it to a board. Just know it's there. Respect its choice to remain hidden. And if you're ever lucky enough to encounter something extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist but does, protect it. Guard it, let it stay free. That's what Ember deserved. That's what his kind deserves. And that's what I spent 47 years of my life trying to give him. I like to think I succeeded. I like to think that somewhere, in whatever comes after, Ember knows he was seen. He was understood. He was deeply, profoundly loved. Not because of what he proved about evolution or biology or the limits of the possible, but because he was himself, my friend, my family, and that was more than enough.